President Trump has tweeted, Prime Minister Netanyahu has confirmed it, that they've arrived at a deal and the Israeli hostages could potentially be released very soon.
Yeah, I read that, and I guess Jeremy Scahill from Drop Site News has direct contacts with the Hamas negotiators in Qatar, and they have confirmed that from their side of the story as well, that they have signed on to at least the first step here. So, and that first step, they say, is turning over all the hostages in exchange for Israeli withdrawal. Of course, Israel holds most of the cards there. We'll see just how far they're willing to withdraw. And we'll see just how serious Donald Trump is at letting the Israelis know that he means it this time, and they better really cease fire and see the thing through. I think one interpretation of the situation that I think probably holds up best is that this is a lifeline that Trump is throwing Netanyahu, because in fact, he cannot accomplish his stated goal of obliterating and completely destroying Hamas. As is well known since at least Vietnam, the cliche, all an insurgency has to do is not lose. And so as long as there's still a few alive, able to call themselves Hamas, then they're not all the way done then. And, Israel was apparently working very hard to find another country that would accept the Palestinian population so they could declare victory then if they just got rid of everybody, Hamas included. But they couldn't get any other country to go along with that and accept the Palestinians, who, of course, don't want to leave their land. And so it seems like this is Trump really doing Netanyahu a favor and saying, listen, man, you might as well quit now, because you're not really getting anywhere on this thing at this point. And it's hurting Israel, and it's hurting Israel's position in the United States, especially.
I didn't, in on any of the announcements, I didn't hear anything about any potential disarmament of Hamas over here. So, I mean, if the final goal was to finally crush Hamas, I don't think that it's been announced yet. So what do you think phase 2 would be like?
Well, I'm not sure. And I have a lot of reading to do about the very recent developments here. But if you go back a few months, there was a Middle East proposal, even a year ago, I guess. There was a proposal that was being talked about by, maybe not quite a year ago, but there's a proposal being talked about by Egypt and Qatar, and I'm not sure who else. If it was Saudi, I guess Saudi. And they were talking about some sort of multinational Arab stewardship over the Strip, where Hamas, under that rule, would not be disarmed, but would agree to be marginalized and essentially stand aside, let a new security force be created, and let, supposed technocrats appointed by those governments to come in and oversee the reconstruction of the place. So something like that, where you have like a temporary Egyptian occupation, or at least, if not military occupation, civilian government officials sent in to administer things in agreement with Hamas, something like that.
Right.
Would, I guess, be the best case type scenario that I could think of.
Okay. Just as an aside, what do you think? Where do you think this leaves Netanyahu's relationship, even President Trump's relationship with Iran? Because I spoke to Dr. Parsi a few weeks ago, and he still is holding true to his timeline that he thinks a potential second flare-up could still happen. And recently we just saw the snapback sanctions being put in place again on Iran. So they achieved some sort of peace in Gaza, but do you think a flare-up with Iran could happen?
Yes, I do. I think that the so-called 12-day war is really probably only an intermission, unfortunately. I agree with Dr. Parsi on that. The problem is that Trump has accepted Israel's bogus definition of Iran's civilian nuclear program as a nuclear weapons program. So, you might remember where people cited the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, as saying Iran has not broken out and begun an attempt to try to obtain a nuclear weapon. And if they did, they'd be more than a year away. And someone brought that up to Trump, and he said, well, I don't care what she says. So in other words, he is not going by what they are literally doing. He's essentially going with Israel's redefinition of terms, which is to say, that to have a nuclear program at all is equivalent to essentially, or just, fill in the dots, is the same thing as them making nuclear weapons. And
Mm.
so once he adopted Israel's position and dropped bombs on Iran's nuclear facilities in the name of that position, it's pretty hard to back down from. Then again, Donald Trump can flip flop on anything. To his credit, in this case, he could change his mind about that and say,
Mm.
well, you know what? I set him back nice and good, and that's good enough for me. But the
Mm.
problem is, of course, that the Iranians are not going to give up enrichment. And unfortunately, I've been working on some other projects, and I'm behind on this story too. To the degree to which they've attempted to restart the facilities at Natanz or any of that, I think Fordo has been pretty much put off limits to them. But I believe that from what the last thing I read, that much of Natanz, of the cascades of centrifuges there, that all survived the attack. I know they lost the main part, the most important part of their conversion facility at Isfahan. Without
Mm.
that, they can't turn the metal to uranium hexafluoride gas or back into metal again from uranium hexafluoride gas. So without that step, that crucial step, their electricity program and everything else is going to be pretty stymied.
Right.
However, they have mastered the fuel cycle for 20 years now, almost. And they had announced right after the war that this isn't going to stop us. We already have a new secret facility we're working on, and we're working on setting up new cascades of centrifuges, and we're going to keep going. Now, Trita Parsi and myself and many others have been warning literally for a generation now that Iran's position here is a latent nuclear deterrent, right? They're a threshold state, meaning they proved that they had mastered the fuel cycle, but they had not gone so far as to make weapons-grade uranium or nuclear weapons. And so they never explicitly said this, but the, inferred bluff here was, don't attack us and we won't make a nuclear weapon. And the American position was, if you make a nuclear weapon, we'll attack you. So that was the basis for a perfect standoff. It's just that that wasn't good enough for Israel, right? Now the question is, after the 12-day war, so-called, of June, there was a real break there in time where, 10 weeks or more than that, 12, 15 weeks, where the IAEA was not there. And the chain of surveillance of Iran's nuclear material was broken. And so I'm not going to sit here and accuse them based on no evidence, but I think we'd be fools to just preclude the possibility that they are going to go ahead and make nukes now. That was the threat, that if you call our bluff, we're going to go ahead and make nukes then. So don't call our bluff. Right. Take our latent deterrent as deterrent enough. But America did not do that. So I don't know that they're making nukes now, but I know that there's been a break in the chain of custody, and that for them to break out and begin to make a nuclear weapon, if they make a simple gun type nuke, could be, fairly easy and require minimal testing. They didn't even test the Hiroshima bomb. The Trinity test was of the Nagasaki implosion bomb only. So they knew the Hiroshima bomb would work just through the equations. It was simple enough. So there is a danger that they're making a nuke now. On the other hand, the good news is, at least they've said, that nothing has changed. The previous Ayatollah and the current Ayatollah have both issued religious edicts, fatwas, that say that God says weapons of mass destruction are haram. Forget it. We're not doing it. And I have to say, they've been pretty conservative about it all this time. And so it's quite possible that they're not going to go that far. I don't know what the hell is the use of a nuclear deterrent, a latent deterrent that stays latent once your bluff is called, right? Maybe, I guess there's some possibility that it really wasn't ever even meant to be a latent deterrent, that really it was only supposed to be an electricity program. Or maybe another interpretation was it was meant to be a latent deterrent, but having had their bluff called, the Ayatollah simply recognizes that American power is such that we can have total air dominance over their country, and that we can really bomb them, and including bomb their capital city, even without nuclear weapons. We can rain massive destruction on their country, on their military, on their nuclear facilities, at will, essentially. And that in the time that it would take them to break out and make a nuke, that they get caught and the next phase of the war would begin. That's, part of it makes sense. At least it was inferred that was part of their thinking this whole time. No point in breaking out to make a nuke because then America will attack us. So we'll just try to deter them by telling them, hey, don't make us break out and make a nuke by attacking us. You see, again, the contradiction there, the catch-22 in the thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry for the long answer, but the point being that the issue is unresolved. Trump says for them to have a nuclear program at all is the same thing as them making nuclear bombs. And they're saying, we're not making nuclear bombs, which again, they may be, but they're saying they're not, but they're also saying that it's just the highest matter of national sovereignty and independence and pride that they have this enrichment capability and they will not give it up no matter what, even if it means war comes again. So where does that leave? It leaves us with the threat of another unnecessary conflict that we really didn't have to have in the first place, but based on the suppositions of the Trump administration at this point only makes sense.
Now, just adding to what you're saying, there are three facets, Mr. Horton, I want you to consider. The IEA had also said that they'd achieved 60% enrichment, that you need about 80% or 90% enrichment to actually have a bomb. So that's one factor of it. The second one is the snapback sanctions that have happened, that happened just during the UN General Assembly that was going on. So that means you've lost that chain of custody because IEA inspectors can't come in once the sanctions are there. And the third is also sort of like the belligerent statements coming out of Netanyahu's office, where he said that they could come up with intercontinental ballistic missiles. We've also seen Iran's sort of ballistic missile production as well, and they are capable. I mean, they did overwhelm Israel's air defenses. So a bunch of these statements and a bunch of these facts that have also aligned over here, one does fear that this could be the next flashpoint in Iran-Israel war. And if that were to happen, can Israel do it without America's intervention or America's help over here?
Okay, well, a lot there. So first of all, on the 60% enriched uranium, as you note, that's still far short of weapons grade. They could have continued to enrich. That is, when we say percent uranium, we mean uranium-235 isotope. That's the sweet stuff that you use for your energy program or your weapons program there. So 60%, if it's not weapons grade, but it's far above electricity grade or medical isotope grade, which is 20%, then what's the purpose of it? Well, the purpose of it was as a bargaining chip to negotiate away. This uranium can be diluted back down again to the proper percent to burn in your centrifuges, to burn in your nuclear reactors. So if you go back and look at the timeline, you'll see that in December of 2020, the Israelis, using the MEK communist terrorist cult, assassinated the director of Iran's nuclear program, a man named Fakhrizadeh, with remote-controlled machine gun, actually. Then, at that time, that was when they began enriching up to 20% again. And then, which is still technically explainable for civilian purposes. You need that for targets for your medical isotope reactor. So that is for radiation for cancer treatment, or for, they do like the radioactive dye that you can put in, they can see your circulatory system and stuff, that kind of thing. So, but then in April of 2021, the Israelis did a sabotage attack at Natanz, and they took credit for it. So that's no conspiracy or whatever. They said that they did it, and they blew up some facilities at the electrical generation station outside. And in response to that, the Iranians began enriching up to 60%. The point of which was blatantly to try to get the then new Biden administration to get back into negotiations, to get back into the JCPOA, which is the nuclear deal of 2015 that Barack Obama had passed when Joe Biden was his right-hand man, was vice president. So they were saying, hey, this is more or less your deal. It was Blinken and Sullivan and all the same people in the Biden administration had been the same ones who negotiated the thing. And so they said, Biden had two choices. He could either go with what Trump was doing, which was the massive, which he had torn up the deal, and plus had added what they called the crippling sanctions regime on Iran, or you could go back to diplomacy. And so Biden had that choice, and he chose in 2021 to continue with Trump's belligerence rather than trying to go back to the Obama policy of negotiation. But so that was the reason for the 60%. And in fact, and this goes now to the snapback, there's a provision in the JCPOA, which let me go back. In 2015, this JCPOA was not quite a treaty because they could not get it past 2/3 of the United States Senate, which they would need. But so what they did was they passed it as a political agreement on an international level, which is a thing. But they got the UN Security Council to stand by the whole thing. Now, in the deal, though, there was no veto power like you would normally have at the UNSC. So it was, in other words, America, Britain, and France, our allies, outnumber China and Russia on the UNSC. So all America ever had to do was convince our allies to agree with us on any part of this deal and how it was to be implemented, whatever, and we would get our way. That was part of the deal. But when America withdrew from the deal, there was actually a part of the JCPOA that says that if America leaves the deal, then Iran is allowed to cease abiding by some of its strictures. So it doesn't say they have the right to leave the deal altogether, but they have the right to stop abiding by some of its limitations. So in other words, when they started to enrich up to 20% again and up to then 60%, they were actually still within the JCPOA, even though they were violating some limits in it. It said they could in the event that the Americans broke the deal first, which of course Donald Trump had done in 2018, based on a bunch of Israeli propaganda about their attempt to make a nuclear bomb. And so the snapback sanctions here are now the result not of Iran really violating the JCPOA, other than in the direct aftermath of the war, kicking the IAEA inspectors out of the country for a few months. And so now they've issued these snapback sanctions, when of course the point is, if the UN Security Council, America and its allies, wanted to be charitable here, they could say, okay, well, you know what? Israel did launch an aggressive war here. And so in context, it's understandable that you would kick the inspectors out. Maybe we want them back in there as soon as possible, right? But, you know, what is implementing the snapback sanctions other than another provocation, right?
Right.
Seems like, you know, at least potentially. And then now you talk about Netanyahu's claims about intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Yeah.
Well, it is true that they have launched rockets into space and I think successfully put some satellites up there. Now, I had read a thing years ago from, I think, the Federation of Atomic Scientists. I think it was, that said that, look, I know people are paranoid about this, but these rockets truly are designed to deliver payloads to space of satellites, and they're really not designed to travel, you know, in intercontinental distances to deliver weapons, and they would be designed differently if they were, et cetera. On the other hand, that's a lot of the same technology, building a 3-stage rocket and being able to deliver a warhead to North America. Problem is, they don't have a nuclear bomb to marry to a 3-stage missile, even if they had secretly developed one, which we have no real intelligence that says they have developed an offensive missile like that. We would know that, and we wouldn't be relying on the Israelis to let us know. That would have been, the CIA would have put that in the New York Times already if they had any inkling of that. And then secondly, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to make a miniaturized gun-type nuke, which is what they almost always make. Uranium nukes are almost always gun-type nukes, which is you take a uranium slug and you fire it down essentially a long barrel into a uranium target. And that's what causes supercritical mass. Whereas virtually all missile-delivered nuclear warheads in the world are implosion bombs, where you have multiple explosions coming in at the same time to implode a plutonium pit in order to cause a fission reaction there. And so it would be extremely unorthodox for the Iranians to figure out a way to take a uranium gun-type nuke and miniaturize it and marry it to a 3-stage rocket and get it here to the United States, particularly with the U.S. not knowing that they had that capability and unable to do anything about it before it was too late. I mean, this is just comic book stuff. As we just saw, the Iranians have virtually no air defense. Israel, through their agents inside the country, through sabotage and just through intelligence gathering and
Yeah.
through must be obviously the sloppiness of Iranian security forces. All their anti-aircraft missiles were taken out in the first few waves of attacks, and they were left helpless. America and Israel had air, not just control, but total dominance over the
Mm,
country, over at least most of the country. I don't know about in the places they weren't even flying, whether there
mm,
were any, SM-300s left up there, but they were
mm,
no match for Israeli and American aircraft. They didn't even take a shot at American aircraft in June when they flew the B-2s in. So they are very overmatched and they know it. So, as I've been telling people for a long time, if you discount all the Israeli propaganda about the insanity of the Ayatollah and just assume he's a normal guy trying his best to be the supreme overlord of Persia right now, what are you going to do with a problem like the United States of America?
mm,
They're not going away. They got 1,500 H bombs deployed. They rule the seven seas and the four oceans and all of international trade and all of international diplomacy. And they're in Israel's pocket and they got you in their sights. Then at best, the dude abides, right? He's gonna try to survive this somehow. He doesn't have the capability to do anything, major and tricky and destructive. In fact,
mm,
as Max Blumenthal pointed out on our show Provoked last night, that when Hamas launched their attack on October 7th, some of their guys got even pretty close to Tel Aviv before
mhm,
they were turned back. Now, if Iran had been behind that and launched a full missile salvo at Tel Aviv at that same time, and
wonderful
Hezbollah
way.
had jumped
Yeah.
in with a full missile salvo at the same time, if that had all been coordinated by the Supreme Ayatollah and his insane Shiite dreams of regional revolution or whatever it is, then Israel might have really gotten hurt badly and may have had to really sue for peace on Hamas's terms, or it would have been a whole different situation. But
Mm,
instead, no, it was just Hamas, the local gang that rules the Israeli prison there in Gaza, broke out and caused some havoc for one day. And Iran was not in on it and was not ready for it and did not jump in to help participate in it. And nor did Hezbollah for at least, a few days until the Israelis started looking their way too.
yeah.
And so, the Israeli kind of narrative about Iran and their danger even to Israel, much less to everybody else in the region or the people of North America, it's all very overwrought compared to the reality. And the biggest gains that Iran has made in the last, 25 years of the century is when George W. Bush gave them Iraq and when Barack Obama made Damascus far more dependent on them for
Mm,
an extra decade and a half before Damascus finally fell to Al Qaeda last December.